All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to tackle something that, let's be honest, can feel like a bit of a puzzle for anyone learning English.
Yeah.
Even for, native speakers. It sometimes just makes you stop and think. We're talking about English verb tenses.
That's right. It's a system that, at first glance, seems pretty straightforward, but I think as you kind of dig in, you realize that there's a real architecture to it.
Right.
A real logic that connects everything.
And that's exactly what we want to do today, right?
Yeah.
We've got some really great resources here from the English Voice Club, and we're not going to spend all day just drilling down into all these conjugation tables. We want to give you, our listener, this kind of clear, big picture understanding of how it all fits together.
Right. And have you ever looked at a sentence and thought, is this past simple? Is this present perfect? What even is it? Or maybe you've just wondered, how many of these things are there?
Yeah.
If that sounds familiar, then this is the place to be. We're going to break it down in a way that hopefully makes it all click for you. So whether you're just starting out or you're looking to kind of solidify your understanding, I think this will be helpful for you.
Okay, so let's get into it. The English Voice Club material does a great job of highlighting what they call these two core building blocks of every single English verb form.
Yeah.
The first one is super obvious. Time, we're talking past, present, or future.
Right. And then the second component, which is where things I think get a little bit more nuanced, but also kind of more interesting, is aspect. So think of time as the when of an action.
Right.
And aspect is kind of the how.
Right.
So how are we focusing on that action? Is it just like a simple fact? Is it something ongoing? Is it something completed? Is it something ongoing that leads to a result? And so the four aspects that we'll be looking at are simple, continuous, sometimes called progressive.
Right.
So if you hear that term, just know that it's the same idea.
Okay.
Perfect and perfect continuous.
Okay. So we've got time, which is past, present, future. And then we've got aspect, which is simple, continuous, perfect, perfect continuous.
Right.
Okay. Now here's where things get really interesting. You multiply those. 3 times 4, you've got 12 possible combinations.
Right.
Right. And the English Voice Club includes this idea of almost like a mental table to visualize it.
Yeah.
So almost imagine a grid in your mind, time across the top, aspects down the side, and it's like this matrix, right?
Yeah. And what's so fascinating, I think, about those 12 combinations is that, they're not just sort of random combinations. Each of those slots in the grid tells a specific story about when and how an action unfolds in time. And it's really precise. English verbs, we use them all the time. We use them very precisely to communicate every day. And, without even thinking about it, we are choosing among those 12 slots to kind of communicate our meaning.
Right. To make this a little more tangible for you, our listener, let's actually look at those sample sentences.
Right.
The first one was, I was having dinner this time yesterday. How do we break that down?
Right. So yesterday immediately tells us that we are in the past.
Yep.
So that's the time.
Yeah.
And then was having signals an action that was in progress at a specific point in that past time. So that's the continuous aspect.
Right.
Put them together and you have past continuous.
Okay, got it. The next one, he's been sitting there for hours. How would we take that apart?
Okay, so in this case, Mazah's been sitting. That S is a contraction of has, anchors us in the present time frame. But Mazah's sitting tells us that this action started in the past and has continued right up to now.
Yeah.
So that's really the key to perfect continuous.
Yeah.
This link between the past and the present with a focus on how long the action has been going on. I think also, one of the things I always notice about this tense is there's often this kind of emotional weight to it.
Oh, yeah.
Of slight impatience or even mild annoyance.
Yeah.
Because you are emphasizing the drawn-out nature of the action.
Right.
And it's relevant to the present moment. It's not just he sat. It's not simply he is sitting now.
Right.
Okay.
It's this whole thing.
It's been happening. Okay. And then the last one from that little quiz there, where will you be next week?
Right. So next week clearly points to the future.
Yeah.
Future time.
Right.
And then will be is the simple form of the verb to be in the future. So that's future simple.
Future simple, yeah. So you see how it works. It's like we're mixing and matching these core ingredients of time and aspect.
Right.
Now, the English Voice Club makes a really important point, and I think this is something that trips up a lot of learners. They say, you don't need to remember all of this right now. The goal isn't to achieve instant mastery.
Absolutely. I think that's the key. The initial and most important takeaway is simply understanding that all these English verb forms are constructed from this combination of time and aspect. It gives you a framework, right? A way to Organize and make sense of what can sometimes feel like this chaotic collection of verb conjugations. Totally, yeah, yeah. And they also bring up something that's super, super crucial, the terminology. They point out that, different teachers, different textbooks, different courses, they might use slightly different words. For example, you might hear progressive instead of continuous.
Right.
It's like the grammar world has its own little secret handshake.
Yeah.
And forgets to tell everyone the password sometimes.
Yeah. And I think this raises a really important point about the consistency of language instruction. I mean, it makes total sense why learners might be confused by that.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
You learn one term.
Right.
And then you come across another one that sounds different,
Right.
but means the exact same thing.
Exactly. And the English Voice Club does a really great job of saying, don't think too much about the words, just focus on the ideas.
Right.
And they even tell the listener that it's not your fault.
Yeah, exactly.
This isn't your fault.
It's just a quirk of how language is sometimes taught.
Totally. Yeah. So the key here is that you just grasp the underlying concept of an action that's ongoing. Whether you call it continuous or progressive doesn't really matter.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. The understanding of the function, what it actually does.
Right.
That's way more valuable than rigidly sticking to one specific term.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So we've got the framework down now.
Right.
We've got this time and aspect.
Yeah.
Now, the English Voice Club goes on to talk about some of the nuances of time, and they make this really interesting observation, especially when it comes to the future.
Yeah.
They point out that the future actually behaves a little bit differently than the past and present.
Right.
Why is that?
Yeah. I think what's fascinating here is this kind of imbalance in how we express past, present, and future in English.
Yeah.
For most verbs, we have these very distinct past and present forms, right?
Right.
So think about be changes to was.
Right.
Go becomes went.
Right.
Want becomes wanted. So these changes within the verb itself signal that we've moved into the past.
Yeah.
And so we can take any of those aspects, simple, continuous, perfect, continuous, and, generally we just change the main verb or the auxiliary verb to its past form, and then we're in the past.
Right. Could you give us a couple examples just to show people how that looks?
Sure. So take the simple aspect.
All right.
I go shopping. In the present becomes I went shopping in the past.
Yeah.
For the continuous, she's running. In the present shifts to she was running in the past.
Yeah.
Even with the perfect aspect, we see this, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't seen it in the present perfect becomes we hadn't seen it in the past perfect.
Right.
So notice how the core aspect, that simple act of going, that ongoing action of running, that completed action of seeing with present relevance, all that stays the same, but the time shifts.
Right.
And it shifts because either the auxiliary verb be or have changes form, or the main verb itself changes form.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really consistent. It's kind of elegant almost.
Yeah.
How you can shift these between past and present. But then you get to the future, and as the English Voice Club points out, it gets a little, less direct.
Right.
It's less straightforward. I remember when I was learning another language, and this is kind of a side note, but learning the future tense was like, oh, this is so easy. And then you get to English and you're like, wait, there's all these different ways to do this? Why is that?
Yeah. It's totally true. And unlike the past and present, there isn't a specific future verb form in English in the same way. We can't just sort of conjugate a verb to make it inherently future tense.
Right.
Instead, we have to add something before the verb to give it that future meaning.
Yeah.
We kind of have to tag it on.
Right. It's almost like these little helpers.
Yeah.
Think of those little helpers who will be going to might these things.
Right, exactly. There's little signposts.
Yeah, signposts that say, hey, we're talking about the future here.
Right, exactly. This hasn't happened yet. And so if we think about the examples that they provide, I'll be waiting. When are you going to tell her?
Right.
And he might join us later.
Right.
In each of those, the future meaning is conveyed by these added words, will, going to, might not, by a fundamental change in the form of be waiting or tell or join.
Right. And it gets even trickier because we also routinely use present verb forms to talk about the future.
Right.
So like, what are you doing this weekend?
Right, exactly. And that, I think, raises a really important point about how context and our intention as speakers really shape meaning.
Yeah.
So think about that question, what are you doing this weekend?
Right.
Clearly refers to a future time.
Yeah.
Even though our doing is the present continuous form.
Right.
Same thing with class starts at 10:00,
Yeah.
using the present simple.
Right.
To talk about this scheduled future event.
Yeah. So the big takeaway here, and the English Voice Club emphasizes this, is that every verb pretty much have a past form, a present form,
Right.
the future. It's almost like we're constructing it.
Right.
We're creating it. There isn't one single neat future tense. There's all these different ways we build that future meaning.
Yeah, that's a crucial point, I think, for understanding this overall system, right?
Yeah.
Because it explains why learners might find expressing the future a little bit more challenging because there isn't this single neat rule to apply across the board.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we've taken a good look at time.
Yeah.
Now let's really dive into these aspects.
Okay.
So first up, the simple aspect. The English Voice Club gives us these examples. I went to Rome last year. I go to work by bus, and I'll go with you. What ties those together?
Yeah. I think what's fascinating about the simple aspect is how general and often factual those actions or states being described are.
Right.
So simple verb forms, regardless of whether they are past, present, or future, tend to describe single completed actions, habitual or repeated actions, or just general states of being.
Okay, so like, I went to Rome. That's a one-time event in the past, now finished.
Right.
A single action.
Yeah.
I go to work by bus. That's something I do every day.
Right.
I'll
Exactly.
repeat it action.
Right.
And then I'll go with you.
Yeah.
That's a single action, but it's planned for the future.
Right. Exactly. And the key characteristic there is that it doesn't specifically emphasize the ongoing nature of an action or its completion in relation to another point in time.
Okay.
It's just like a direct, straightforward presentation of the event or the state.
Right. And they do make a point to clarify about the present simple, that it generally expresses, these repeated actions or states that are true in the present,
Right.
not typically single actions happening at this exact moment.
Right, exactly. And that's a crucial distinction to grasp.
Right.
Because, while you might say, I eat breakfast every morning to describe this habitual action,
Yeah.
you wouldn't usually say, I eat breakfast to describe the single act of eating that's happening right now.
Right.
And that's where the continuous aspect comes in.
Right. Exactly. And they also point out that past and future simple, they can cover both single and repeated actions or states.
Yeah.
Like, I went to Rome every year until 2012. That describes a repeated past action.
Right.
And I'll go with you on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yeah.
Describes a repeated future action.
Yeah. These examples really underscore, I think, the flexibility of the simple aspect in conveying these different kinds of events across different time frames.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the continuous aspect,
Okay.
also known as the progressive aspect, right?
Yeah.
And here are the examples they give. I was eating dinner at 7 o'clock last night. I'm eating a tuna sandwich. And this time next week, I'll be eating fresh seafood on an island.
Right.
What do we see happening here?
Yeah. The most kind of immediately noticeable connection is the grammatical structure.
Okay.
All continuous forms use a form of the verb be,
Right.
whether it's was, am, will be, combined with the main verb ending in ing.
Right.
So eating, telling, helping, getting dark.
Right.
That ing suffix is a key identifier.
Right. It's like be sets the time,
Yeah.
past, present, future.
Right.
And then the ing word signals the action that's in progress.
Exactly. And that leads directly to the meaning of continuous forms. As the English Voice Club explains, they describe actions that are incomplete, ongoing, at a specific moment or period in time.
Right. So I was eating dinner at 7 o'clock last night. That paints a picture of something that was happening then.
Right.
At that moment, I was in the middle of eating.
Exactly. The eating hadn't finished.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing with she was telling me a really interesting story.
Right.
Implies she was in the middle of narrating.
Right.
Continuous aspect really puts the focus on the duration and the unfolding of an action
Mm-hmm.
at a specific point in time rather than on its completion
Right. Okay.
or just its general occurrence.
Okay. Next, we have the perfect aspect. Some of the examples include, he hadn't finished speaking, she's finished all her homework, and will have finished everything by Friday.
Yeah.
So what's the grammatical pattern here? What's the commonality?
Right. So the defining characteristic of perfect verb forms is this use of the verb have.
Okay.
In its past form, had, present form has or have, often contracted as or as,
Right.
or the future form will have,
Okay.
followed by the past participle of the main verb.
Right.
So finished speaking, finished homework, thought about, never tried.
Right.
These are all examples of past participles.
Okay.
And I think, a good way to think about the perfect aspect is that It's always looking back from a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a photograph almost. You're capturing a completed action before something else happens.
Right.
Or before the present moment.
So the have element seems to set that point.
Right.
And then it's like, okay,
Right.
that thing has been completed.
Exactly. And that leads us really to the core meaning of perfect verb forms. They establish a connection between two different points in time,
Okay.
often highlighting the completion of an action and its relevance to that later point.
Right. And the English Voice Club uses this example. He hadn't finished speaking when everybody started to leave. So the past perfect hadn't finished speaking that connects the act of speaking to this subsequent event of people leaving.
Right.
It tells us that the speaking was incomplete before the leaving began.
Right. And the past perfect is incredibly useful for establishing this kind of clear sequence of events in the past, making it clear which action occurred earlier.
Right, exactly. And the present perfect.
Yeah.
Like she's finished all her homework.
Yeah.
It links that past action of completing the homework to the present situation.
Right.
Where now it's done.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The result of that past action is relevant in the present.
Right. And then the future perfect.
Yeah.
We'll have finished everything by Friday.
Right.
That connects the present moment to this point in the future.
Right.
Friday.
Exactly. So sometime between now and Friday, that action of finishing will be completed.
Right. So the perfect aspect is all about creating these temporal connections.
Exactly.
And emphasizing this idea of completion.
Yeah, it has this layer of information
Yeah.
about the relationship between those different moments in time.
Okay. We're on to the final one.
Okay.
This is a big one. Perfect continuous.
Right.
Here are the examples. She'd been feeling much better. We've been waiting for ages. And by the end of the day, we'll have been working.
Right.
Now, this one looks like a real combination of the last two, right?
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed it. It really is this blend of the perfect and the continuous.
Okay.
So grammatically, it's formed using a form of have. So have, or have, or will have, followed by been, which is the past participle of be, and then the main verb with that ing ending.
Right. So if we take just like a basic action like I walk through the forest, you can create these different forms by just changing that have part. Right. I had been walking, I've been walking, I will have been walking.
Exactly. And the meaning is also a synthesis of those two.
Okay.
So the perfect part indicates that it connects 2 points in time.
Right.
While the continuous part emphasizes that the action has been ongoing or in progress.
Okay.
Leading up to that second point.
Right. And an example, I had been walking through the forest for hours before I realized I was lost. That really illustrates that.
Yeah.
You know, the had been walking connects that earlier period of walking to the later realization of being lost.
Right.
Well, it highlights how long I was walking.
Exactly. And it was ongoing.
Right.
And then she'd been feeling much better. Implies a connection to a previous time where she wasn't feeling well.
Right.
And suggests that her improved state might be the result of this ongoing process.
Right. We've been waiting for ages. Again, that connects to some point in the past when the waiting began.
Right.
Now we're in the present. And it was this continuous thing.
Right. And often with that, again, that slight edge of impatience.
Totally, yeah.
You know, like, come on, we've been waiting forever.
Yeah. And then lastly, by the end of the day, we'll have been working without a break for 14 hours. So now we're looking ahead to the future.
Right.
Connecting the present to the end of the day.
Yeah.
And emphasizing that it's going to be continuous up until that time.
Right.
The English Voice Club does mention, though, that past and future perfect continuous, less common.
Yeah, they are less common in everyday speech.
Right.
But I think they definitely serve these very specific functions.
Right. Yeah. Well, you might not use them all the time. It's good to have them in your tool belt when you need that level of specificity.
Right. Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into English verb tenses, you know, guided by the English Voice Club, I think what we've really seen here is that there's this system at work.
Yeah.
It's not just random.
Right.
It's really about how these two things, time and aspect, come together.
It's past, present, future, simple, continuous, perfect, continuous. And those combine in these systematic ways to give us all the verb forms that we use.
Right. And I think it's crucial to remember, you know, as they point out, this gives you the framework, the foundation. Each individual verb form will have its own kind of specific nuances.
Oh, yeah.
And uses that are definitely worth kind of exploring in more depth as you continue learning.
Totally. If you, our listener, want to get some more practice, really test your understanding, we highly recommend going and checking out the English Voice Club. They have a great lesson.
Yeah.
even a little quiz there.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah. And, as you go forward learning English, maybe consider this. How does this whole system, this way of combining time and aspect, how does that reflect how English speakers think about events, how they think about actions, and how they relate to time? Is this different from other languages you might know? And if so, how might that actually shape our perspective on the world around us? It's a question to think about. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, it's a question to ponder.
It is.
All right, well, until next time, this has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
See you next time.